All right. So let's. I know. It's all. I almost look too good. That's the problem. I get all these made by my buddy. He owns a tent and awning store. Say this again. Forgot to submit your homework. Your GitHub homework you didn't submit. You know, that's you fail for the semester. All right. So this isn't even this class, is it? All right, so last time we looked at GitHub, so now we know how to get our project up in the sky and everything. And if you noticed, there was a solution to our the bug a lot of people were getting, the error you were getting rather, up on Slack. Put a YouTube video up there, one of your fellow students. So you can take advantage of that if you were having problems. If you didn't notice that, there's your reason for checking Slack more often. All right. So let's start talking about how we're going to design our dungeon crawler. And then you can tell me if you have a better idea. The way I kind of envision this is we have a room. All right, so you know this is what a room looks like in our dungeon, and we know that in our current implementation that we have up to 4 exits in a room, right? All right, so we have a couple more of these dudes, and obviously an exit is in yellow. It just makes sense, right? All right, so we have 4 of these dudes. Up to 4 of these dudes. All right, so now when then we have our player. So there's our player. All right, so our player is going to start off. Maybe we always have the player centered in the room that they're in. We can decide if that makes sense or not. And then they'll use the arrow keys to choose which direction they want to go. If they press the right one, your guy will move towards this. If they press the left one, he'll move towards this, so on and so forth. And upon hitting an exit, you will then load into the next room. That makes some sense? All right. So kind of sort of esque to like an old Final Fantasy game, something like that. Now, if you want to design yours to be more 3D interactive, where you're walking through the a tunnel and you come into this open area and you literally turn left or right, you can. I feel like if we try to do that in class, what we're going to end up doing is spending more time on the design and less time on the coding aspect of it. So if you'd like to take on the challenge of maybe making yours better, let's say, feel free. And if we come up with some cool ones, we'll do a demo day near the end of the term or something like that to show them. But I think this will allow us to work with some coding scripty type stuff, focusing more on the coding side than on the design side. So any suggestions along these lines? Go ahead.
Where would the player be?
My thinking is you always, once he enters a room, you throw him in the middle. And then from here, the idea would be is you might have, let's see, what are monsters? Little circles? Oh man, they got to be red. So here's our rats. triple rat, triple threat. All right, so you come into the room, you got your rats lined up there, so you see the enemies. So now from here, you can either and maybe what we always do is we always position the monsters in front of the exit that they came from, something like that. So if in this particular case, these rats came from the north, and now they're well, yeah, they came from the north, went through the south door, and now they're blocking our door to the north. So the idea would be is that if we are going to go through the northern exit here, we press up, our guy starts moving forward, he's going to run into the rats, and now there's a fight. Make sense? And then we'll have a different screen set up for our fights. So maybe the fight screen, very I'm actually just going to steal this guy. So, you know, fights, we don't have exits. And we obviously, you know, if you ever played the original Final Fantasy games, your enemies would be staged over to the left, the heroes would be over here to the right, you'd have your specs or whatever, and maybe we'll give a couple of buttons for the different kinds of attacks or something like that. And you know, it's a turn-based thing where, you know, your guy maybe goes first and you pick which one of the rats you're going to attack, yada yada yada. We see hit points counting down, right? So think about this in terms of our rolly ball thing. We had a lot of the components that we're going to need for this built into that tutorial, right? Okay. If some event happens, we change a variable, it updates some UI element for the current score, current hit points, whatever it is. All right. So we're able to apply it to that. Okay. So now, you know, so this is kind of a separate scene. All right, we want to think about this in terms of scenes now. So now we've added this idea of a separate scene. So as your guy is going through our dungeon, every single room you enter is the same scene, just with different variables turned on or off depending on which exits are available. Make some sense? All right. So suggestions about this approach. Any updates we want to make before we dive in? Go ahead.
Would we make it so that we could just sit there?
Potentially. I think realistically, we're probably going to not run into the battle thing for, you know, a week or something. So we can decide that if we want to be able to just stalemate them and wait them out. But we might decide that the way they work is they move to the center and then choose where they're going to go from there. So they might attack you. Something like that, but we can decide what makes sense for our game. All right, good. Okay.
Whenever someone takes damage, we could just make a function that like quickly goes from the highest number to the lowest number, so it actually like goes down. It's like the number goes from like 12 to 8, it goes 12 to 8. Oh yeah. Make it more.
Oh, you mean like a progress bar of how, so maybe above each of these guys is like a little progress bar of their current health?
Yeah.
And you see it tick down? Yeah, I mean, those are things we could do. If you kind of think back to some older video games, what did progress bars usually look like? They look like kind of a rectangle with a bunch of little squares in it, right? And what happened is a square would disappear one at a time, right? Kind of like our collectibles or our pickups from our tutorial thing as we, you know, so we'll just tell something to go away as they're counting down. So we can create our own progress bar. Unity has that kind of stuff built into it. There's assets you can get for progress bars, but you know, we're kind of throwing ourselves back into maybe old school game development where, you know, the programmers had to say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to represent a progress bar. So yeah, we could certainly do that if we want to do it visually as opposed to just a bunch of text or something. Yeah. All right, so let's start off with an idea like this. There are asset stores. There's an asset store for Unity where you can go and find kind of some cool dungeon layout looking things, or and have a player looking guy, and maybe things that look like doors or whatever. I'm going to just start off with placeholders for just 3D geometry, and then you can decide from there. Or I'll offline go and find some different graphics, or if you want to message me something about something from the asset store you think would look cool, I'll put it in there. That way we're not spending time in class shopping for, what a cool character looks like or what the dungeon looks like. We have enough stuff we can work with to kind of make this work. All right, so let's jump into Unity here. All right, we already have our floor in here. Now we're going to well, first of all, I already named my scene last time. We called it Dungeon Room. Remember? So that kind of goes hand in hand with this idea of what we're looking at here. This is a scene, this is a dungeon room, and every dungeon room is going to look the same. We're going to be able to use that same scene over and over and over again, but the variables associated with that scene are going to change. Make sense? And maybe we have a transition thing, although at some point it gets kind of ridiculous. But, if we go through the door to the west, maybe something flashes on the screen to kind of allow it to reset behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden you're in the new room. You see your guy walk in from whichever side it is. And that's the way the scene always starts. So we could certainly look at some of that. But effectively, we want to start off with we're going to write a script to be able to control which elements are visible and invisible. Okay. So we want to start off with now right now, when we look at our scene, we're facing it like this. Now, this actually is not going to translate very well for our current game. We're effectively using a 3D game engine to create 2D, kind of a 2D game. We can get some depth on our game if we put up some walls and things like that. So we're not completely going 2D. But what we might want to do here is we might want to take the main camera. Let's see. Oh, I'm still running here. Okay, we might take the main camera. We might go ahead and put the main camera at 0, 0, move it straight up, and then angle it down to the ground. Oh, I want to. There we go. Right. So I moved it to maybe make it a little higher here. You did it at 10. Okay, there we go. Looks reasonable enough. We can always make it bigger or smaller or whatever later on. All right. So what we did is we moved the camera to the center, 0, 0, on X and Z, and then we moved it up in the sky, and then we have it angled down on the X-axis at 90 degrees. So we have a top-down view. And again, you do what you want with your design. This is just the approach I'm going to take. All right, so now we can give ourselves a look here. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a folder. And we're going to call this folder materials. And then we're going to create a material. And let's go ahead and pick a color for our material. There, that's good dungeon floor. Why can't I rename it by clicking? All right, so we'll call that floor. We'll drag that over to that guy. So now when we run this, we see that we're looking at now we've upgraded it to 4K high definition. This is a 2-bit color. So we're really, all right. So now we have that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and place 4 exits in here. Just throw them onto the screen, whatever we want them to look at. And we might end up angling our camera a little bit to create a little bit of depth looking stuff in our game. But for right now, this allows us to kind of lay it out without going nuts. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object here. I'm just going to call this guy exits. Almost like giving myself a little folder to keep my exits in. And then I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to create. Let's just do our, we'll just do them as cubes for right now. If you want to replace it with other types of things, you can. So we're going to do a cube. We're going to call this guy West. And I'm just not very good at double clicking that East. North, and North and South. All right. Now, right now, we can't see our guys because they are, if we go ahead and click on let's click on West here. Oh, and I'm also still running. Oh, this is going to suck because I'm going to have to recreate all these. Let me copy this, see if I can pop it back in. All right. So when your game is running and you do anything, it allows you to test it in real time. But as soon as you stop the game from running, it all disappears. Let's see if that copy thing worked. All right, it did. So I lucked out. All right, so all right, so we have our cubes there. I'm going to go back to a top-down view. And just for a moment here, I'm going to spread my cubes out. So I'm going to roughly put them in the west location, the east location. We'll get them centered in there later. The north location and the south location. Good. Oh, how did I make the color? Is that what you're asking? So and we'll go ahead and create a new one here. So I'm going to say create. So first I did is in my assets folder down here, I created a new folder called materials just for organization. Then once you're in that folder, right click, we're going to say create, go down and find material. Wouldn't it be better if all that was alphabetized? It seems to be situationally alphabetized. But in any case, so find material. And what color do we make our doors? Yellow? Okay. So then you click on, so we're going to call this guy a door. So click on that door material. Then over here on the right in your inspector, click where it says albedo. And kind of sort of select the color that you want. And then what I'm going to do, the easiest way to apply this to all those is I'm going to select all 4 of my exits here. And then I'm going to drag the color over to that guy. So I selected the 4 of them here. Rather than drag it into the scene, I selected my 4 game objects, which then gives me an inspector view of kind of what they all have in common. And then I was able to drag my material component over here and it applied it to all 4. All right, makes some sense. And these are all just things you'll get used to as you're using Unity. And fairly quickly, I mean, we're going to start seeing where my expertise ends. But this kind of gets the job done, and you guys can make things look better if you'd like. That's not really my my purview, let's say. All right. So now we have these exits. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double click on floor. Actually, I'm gonna highlight my 4 exits. And I want to go ahead and get them to land. I'm going to put them at 0.5. All right. Or on the Y. All right. Then I'm going to move each one kind of into position. Or at least closer to position. All right. Now I'm gonna, well, you know what? I'm probably not going to be able to do a great job at this anyways, but all right. So now I'm going to select all 4 of them. I'm going to drop them down until I see them kind of sink into the plane a little bit. So I highlighted all 4, which then gives me the, what did the lady call it in the thing? The widget?
Yeah.
Is that what she called it? The widget? Yeah, this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I did that. So now we see those exits, and then I'll just kind of shove them around a little bit more. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so I'm going to call that 15. I'm going to call this 5. Call this 10. And we'll call this. Oh, actually, hold on. Sorry, what was that? That's a 5. And this should be a -5. All right. Perfectly created exits. All right. So now we run the game. We see our guys there. All right. So now, just as a reminder, I'm going to go ahead and just save this. I'm going to go ahead and open up Get Desktop. Just as a reminder, notice, and I already have my repository selected here. So I'm just going to create a summary here saying, created our initial dungeon room as my summary, and then I'm going to commit to main. Remember, that commits the changes I've made to my local repository. Okay, and then I'm going to say, okay, it's perfect. So I'm just going to say push origin, and that's going to upload it to the cloud to make my current Git repository up on GitHub, make it up to date with the stuff I've added. Okay, just kind of showing you that cadence. So now I've come back to work. I'm going to keep cooking here. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to have the ability to turn exits on and off. Okay. Suggestions and how we accomplish that, knowing what we know currently, what we've learned from our roll-a-ball dealy flippy. Go ahead.
Is there something that we did check component false or something?
Okay, well, so I think you're talking about with the pickups. How did we make a pickup disappear? Let's assume we could do that. I think it's called set active to false. Yeah, so we can do that. But how do I create the ability to select what's on, what's off? How would you accomplish this? I'll give you a hint. There's going to be a script involved. All right, go ahead.
What do you mean by turning exit on and off? You mean
I want to be able to programmatically do something like that, where there's only a north, south, and west exit. Because not every room has a north, south, east, and west, right? This room only has a south exit as we've designed it. So, well, I need to have my starting point. So basically every single room starts off as the same room, and then we turn exits on and off. So in this room, we would have started off with 4 exits, 4 doors. Then we say, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. All we're left with is this door in this particular room. This is a template room that we can then dial into whatever room it's currently representing. Because every room in our dungeon here is going to look the same. We're just moving from room to room to room. And the thing that changes is the current exit configuration and then who's in the room, potentially monsters or whatever. So what we're trying to do right now is how do we create a, how do we programmatically control which exits are showing and which exits are hidden in a room? What do you suggest? Good.
Make 4 variables.
Where? Yeah, we're gonna have a script. Let's start with that. So we're gonna create a folder for script. All right. Oop. I meant to create a folder for my script, but all is not lost. So we'll call this guy scripts. I just gotta spell it better. Scripts. I'll drag my script in there. All right. And I want to rename this guy. What do you want to call it? All right. We'll call it dungeon setup for right now. You can always shift it later. Okay. So I'll go ahead and double click and open the script up. Oh, it wants to access files in my download folder. Ooh, my free trial expires in 15 days.
5 days.
Oh, the other one said 15.
Yeah.
Oh, that was an old warning. The new warning is 5 days. So at some point I'll sign into that because I think with your i365 it will work. But regardless, all right. So you want me to have some variables in here? Okay, what kind of variables?
I was just thinking.
Okay, some Boolean variables. All right, what are you going to do with those Boolean variables? Let's talk this through a little bit before we just type stuff.
Well, actually, I would add Boolean variables to.
Let's start off with this. Does this script need to know about my 4 exits? If he's going to turn them on and off, he needs to know about them, right? What kind of animal are my exits? Cat, dog, or game object? All right, so these guys are game objects. How do I get myself programmatic access to those 4 game objects that are in my scene? We did this in our rollerball. How did we get our I think it was our scoreboard, right? How did we get how did we give ourselves access to our scoreboard and set up a script? Go ahead.
I was gonna say for our objects, we were just constantly testing to see if we entered into someone's.
Well, that was the collision. Yeah, that's when we were doing the on trigger enter thing. Did we bump into something? All I want right now is I want to be able to come in here on update or on start and turn the northern exit off. Let's just do that. When we start our script here, I want to be able to disable the northern exit programmatically so that when all is said and done and I launch it, my code ends up looking, my first scene looks like that. That's what I want to be able to programmatically do. Make sense? So the first thing I need to do is I need to have some way of giving myself access inside my scripts of these 4 game objects. How do I do that? Remember we talked about MVC. What's MVC again? Remind me. Model view controller. We talked about design patterns, right? Model view controller. The model is our data. We're not worrying about data at the moment. The view is what we see. This is our view. The controller is our script. We need to make our controller know about some stuff from our view. How do I do that? We make our field public. Public game object, call this guy north exit. Public game object, south exit. I could just copy a good portion of that, couldn't I? Public game object, east exit. Public game object, west exit. Save it. By making those four guys public, and I'll come to you. By making them public, what have I done? First of all, we decided that our floor, he's the guy that's going to have the script. We can do that. We have to decide who's going to hold on to the script. Okay, so we're going to say, well, let's have the floor hold the script, and we'll make him aware of the exits. Okay. You know, otherwise, what you could do is I could come into, I'll just create an empty game object here. I'll call it room. And I'm going to go ahead and drag my floor and my exit into room. So we actually can do now is we can let the room empty game object have a script associated with it. And he kind of dials in himself. He doesn't need to know about the floor because he's never going to make the floor disappear, at least not in our current game. So we'll go ahead and we're going to let our room have this script. Can I add a script? Script. Oh, can an empty game object not have a script? Can't add script. Group class cannot be found. All right, then we're going to do it this way. I'm going to go to room. Click there. I'm going to say add component. We're going to say new script. We're going to call this guy dungeon setup. I don't know why that guy didn't work. Yeah. So there's my dungeon setup. I'm sure there's a reason why that wasn't working, but
I don't know, I had a couple issues.
so I'll just do this. We are going to get rid of our old script, just delete it, but I copied those 4 lines. And then I'll just drag my new script into my scripts folder. And room is the guy that has that script. I'll go ahead and open the script, and then I'll paste my 4 public variables in there. So now that we've done that, notice when I click on room and we see our script, see I have the 4 variables for north exit, south exit, east exit, and west exit here. And what I can do is I can drag west exit. Oh, sorry. I can drag west exit into the little box here for west exit. I can drag east exit into the little box here for east exit. I can drag north exit into the little box here for north exit. And I can drag south exit into the box for south exit. That is MVC in action. We programmatically created 4 public game object variables, which opens up little, drag and drop points here in my script. So that, and then I just drug my 4 exits in there. All right, now if I hit play right now, nothing special happens. There's my current scene. But what I'll go ahead and do just as a point is inside of start, I'll say this dot north exit dot set active equal to false. Set active a function. So when my script, remember start only happens one time. It's kind of sort of like our constructor. When this script first starts, what's he going to do? He's going to turn off the northern exit every single time. So this isn't overly dynamic. Every single one of our rooms now has no northern exit. But when we run this, we will now see that our northern exit is off. All right. Question. Was it important? It's like super important. All right. Well, it pops up again. Let me know. I just needed to finish that whole thought. All right. So again, what we want to focus on here is the idea of MVC. All right. MVC is a design pattern. Remember, we talked about design patterns. Design patterns are proposed good solutions to common problems. Okay, where a common problem depends on, you know, a person's perspective. The example I used in class was like making a peanut butter and jelly. You know, we each have our own little maybe there's 2 or 3 kind of techniques that we follow. Some people put it, you know, the jelly and the peanut butter on in a different order or whatever, blah, blah, blah. All right. Well, MVC, model view controller, is a design pattern that attempts to govern the idea of keeping your data separate from your interface, separate from your code. But when necessary, creating ways for the two to talk, for those different areas to talk to each other. And in this particular case, we needed our 4 exits from our view to be accessible inside of our controller. Make sense? And we did that by creating those guys as fields up here, but making them public. By making it public, Unity then picks up on those and says, okay, we will go ahead and give you access to those. So our script gives us 4 little buckets that we can then drag the physical game objects into, and now we've linked it. And remember, design patterns do not dictate an implementation. They dictate an idea. So MVC says it's a good idea to separate those 3 things. This is the way Unity has accomplished it. Go ahead.
Can't think of any other.
100%. And we're going to be using it because we're going to be bringing in our code that we wrote in Java to be just plain Jane C# objects to keep track of what's happening under the hood of our thing here. The way we're creating scripts right now is to control, that's why they're called controllers, to control the behavior of our game objects in our program. But nothing keeps us from coming in here and just saying, oh, well, this dude's no longer a mono behavior. Now you can't connect them to a game object because game objects can only hold mono behaviors, but that doesn't mean you still can't create instances of a room or instances of an exit or something like that. We're creating the ability to have a visual component of our dungeon. Whereas when we did this in Java, we had a non-visual version where we just printed crap out to the screen or whatever. Now we're going to make the 2 mesh together.
Kind of like over something like I mean, because in order to like say, oh, these rules only apply to, you know, this thing, I don't know, to this object or whatever.
Let's think about it like a behavior. Let's assume that everybody in here can jump. All right. So we each have the idea, and let's say we all jump the same way. All right. So I have a jump script. You have the same jump script. You had the same jump script. Now, when you jump, The rest of us don't pop up into the air, right? You have your own individual behavior associated with you, which is this jump script that whenever you trigger it, let's say you fly up into the air, right? So that's what we're doing here is we're giving every single, we've attached this guy to this empty game object that I just called room. And effectively room is just a folder that's holding on to these game objects, which are floor, exits, these things. But room is not actually something visible. He's just organizing some things that we see. But I attached the game script to him. So the idea of a room now has this ability called dungeon setup, similar to the ability, like you have the ability to jump. Okay, so he has this ability, and in that code, whenever this particular room comes into existence, which would happen every single time a what did I call my I called it a dungeon room. Every single time my dungeon room scene gets loaded, and we're gonna have different dungeon room scenes, but every single time that guy gets loaded, a room game object is created, and he spins up his dungeon setup script that has the behavior that's associated with that particular guy. So right now we've only worked with mono behaviors, which are the default thing for scripts in Unity that says, hey, call my start method first for the initial setup, then call update every single frame and do whatever is in there, unless you've added some other crap. Like we added the on trigger enter in our other game and that stuff to listen for, programmatic collisions rather than physics-based collisions. But that's kind of the idea. All right, other questions for I saw a hand over here. You got it? Okay. All right, go ahead. Once you're in here, I'll just dump one here. Oh, I think I could dump one, can I? There, he's empty. So all yours currently say none on it. So I'm going to go over. So make sure you have your room selected so you see the screen over here. And then I'm just going to go grab my north one, just click and drag. And drop them in the right bucket. And it's only going to let you do that if it's of the right type. All right, so where's my code here? I created these guys to be public game objects, so I can only drop things that are game objects into that, which really actually would be everything. Okay, so I can throw whatever, I can put the camera in there if I want to. And if you throw the camera in there in place of the northern exit, the very first thing we do is lights out. Our game's running, but we see nothing. Why? Camera's disabled. All right. All right. Other questions? Okay. So now we have our 4 exits in there. We want to have some way of turning those guys on and off. Maybe following some sort of setup. All right. Because right now I'm just assuming that we have our 4 things. Now, earlier you mentioned something about Booleans. So we could come in here and we can create a public bool north on, south on, east on, west on. We can give ourselves 4 public variables. And I think the MVC implementation on here will work for this. So if I click on my room now, yep. So one thing you could have done is you could have put all these on one line. Public game object, north exit, comma, south exit, comma, east exit, comma, west exit, if you prefer that. I don't know if I necessarily do or not. But since they're all the same type, It's fine. And maybe that looks a little cleaner to you. Something like that. We have our public game objects and our public Boolean. All right. So now what we can do is out here in Unity, we can just hit the check boxes on or off for what we want, ideally for what we want to have turned on or turned off. Make some sense? So for our homework, update our current game such that only the exits that have an associated Boolean value of true are visible, and hide the exits where the associated Boolean value is false. You must use MVC and I'll just say a script to accomplish this. Submit a link to your GitHub repository and the self-assessment. So at the end of the day, homework answer should be in here. All right, you need to write the necessary code to interpret the current value of your Boolean values for this. And I'll go ahead and correct. As of right now, you could. I'm positive you can.
All right.
You could. You could accomplish this assignment in 4 lines of code. I'm not saying strive for that. Do it the way that makes the most sense to you, but this can be accomplished in 4 lines of code. All right, so, and I think I gave you the link to my GitHub last time, right? Copy link. So given that, so there's my starting point for my code. So if you want to start with the same code I have, all you have to do is go in and fork that repository, and then you can download it and work off of that, because now at that point you own it. Okay? Don't just download my folder and make copies to it, because you will have my Git repository and you won't have permission to upload it to your account. You would have to go in and delete those hidden .git folders and then recreate the repository in there. So it's not unrecoverable. It just will be a little bit of a headache. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. Just say it's the same syntax as Java. All right, I'll see everybody on Friday.
So I went through all the classes I did and I one thing that